The gun went off before anyone had time to scream. One shot, straight into the ceiling of Café Myri. Plastered dust rained down like snow over the dinner tables, over the half-eaten bowls of jjigae, over the faces of people who had walked in 20 minutes ago thinking about nothing more dangerous than what they were going to order for dessert. 3 men, face coverings, moving fast. The leader, the one with the gun still raised, chest heaving, eyes wild above his mask, shouted something. His voice cracked in the middle of it. That crack told Ha-Eun everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was. Not a professional, not calm, desperate. And desperate men, in Ha-Eun's experience, were far more dangerous than cruel ones. The restaurant erupted. Chairs scraped. A woman screamed. A man knocked his table sideways trying to get to the floor. Ha-Eun watched it happen the way you watch a wave before it hits you. She saw it coming. She understood it was unavoidable, and she made a decision about how she was going to meet it. She was holding a stack of plates. She set them down, both hands, carefully, not because she wasn't afraid. She was God. She was. But because broken plates would not help anyone, and right now, the only currency that mattered was control. She lowered herself to the floor. Slowly, palms flat. She could feel the cold tile through her apron. She pressed into it and reminded herself of the only thing that had ever gotten her through the worst moments of her life. You're still here. That's enough. But we need to go back. Because the story of that Tuesday night doesn't start with the gun. It starts 3 hours earlier, with a woman who had already survived more than most people twice her age, carrying a tray through a restaurant she didn't own, toward a future she was building one night shift at a time. Ha-Eun was 29 years old. She had been working at Café Myri for 2 years, evening shifts, 5 days a week, tips counted carefully and set aside in an envelope tucked behind the loose tile under her kitchen sink. She was 4 years into a nursing program she attended on weekday mornings before her shift started, and she had never, not once, missed a class. She was not the kind of person that the world looked at twice. That was fine. She had learned early that being overlooked had its own kind of power. At 6 in the evening that Tuesday, the dinner rush was building. Her co-worker Desol, 23, warm-hearted, perpetually anxious about money, grabbed Ha-Eun's sleeve between tables. I'm 300,000 short on rent, Desol whispered, urgent and miserable. My landlord has been texting me since Monday. Ha-Eun looked at her. Have you eaten today? Desol blinked. That's not. What does that have to do with? Go eat something, Ha-Eun said. I'll cover your section. Problems are bigger on an empty stomach. Desol stared at her for a moment with the expression of someone who couldn't decide if Ha-Eun was the wisest person she'd ever met or simply the most tired. Then she went to eat. Ha-Eun kept moving. An hour later, the elderly regular in the corner, a man named Mr. Yoon who came every Tuesday and always ordered the same thing, realized he was 51 short of his bill. His hands were shaking as he counted and recounted his coins. The shame on his face was the kind that cut deep. Ha-Eun cleared his table, brought him extra rice, told him it was on the house, and said it so matter-of-factly that he couldn't argue. He looked up at her with that deep, slightly surprised gratitude of a man who hadn't expected kindness. You're a good girl, he told her. Ha-Eun just smiled and moved on. She didn't do kind things for the gratitude. She did them because she had been the person on the other side of that moment too many times to count. At 7:15, the door opened and a man walked in alone. Ha-Eun was mid-order at another table. She didn't look up immediately. But Desol, behind the counter, went very still. Not the stillness of recognition, but the older, more animal stillness that the body produces when something in the room has shifted in a way the brain hasn't caught up to yet. The man was tall, lean, dark coat, no tie, collar open. He moved through the restaurant without looking around. No hesitation, no orientation, and went directly to the corner booth. The one with walls on 2 sides and a clear line of sight to the front door. He had chosen it in 3 seconds and hadn't looked at anything else. Ha-Eun finished her table and walked over. What can I get you? He looked up. His eyes were dark and completely still. The kind of eyes that had learned, over a long time, to give away nothing. Coffee. Black. No sugar. Food. No. She wrote it down. Looked at him for exactly as long as she looked at every other customer. Not a second more. And walked away. In the corner booth, Park Ji-ho watched her go. His name meant nothing to her. But in certain parts of Seoul, in the underground gambling halls beneath Gangnam, in the quiet offices where decisions about entire city blocks were made over green tea and paper ledgers, his name meant everything. He was 38 years old, and he ran the Seojin syndicate with the same precise, unhurried force he brought to everything. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. He simply made decisions, and the decisions happened. He was not supposed to be in this restaurant tonight. He had stopped here because Min-jun, his right hand, his shadow, the man who had kept him alive through 3 assassination attempts, was 10 minutes away, and this cafe was between 2 places Ji-ho needed to be. Convenience. Nothing more. He picked up his phone, answered 3 messages, drank his coffee when it arrived, and then a drunk man at a corner table grabbed Desol's wrist. Desol yelped. The room flinched. The drunk man was already getting louder, more belligerent, the particular ugliness of someone who had confused a woman's patience for permission. Ha-Eun was there in 4 seconds. She didn't run. She walked quickly, but without any panic in her movement, and she placed herself between Desol and the man with the quiet precision of someone who had been the barrier between danger and someone smaller than her for a very long time. Sir. Her voice was level, not cold, not aggressive, solid, like something that had decided it was not moving. It's been a long night. Let me get you some water and help you settle up, and we'll get you home safely. The man blinked at her. All that ugly energy met her steadiness and seemed not to know what to do with it. He sat down, just like that. In the corner booth, Ji-ho had not moved, but his eyes had left his phone, and they were on Ha-Eun. If you're already hooked, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. This story is only getting started. Min-jun arrived at 7:40 and slid into the booth without being invited, because he was one of 3 people on Earth who could do that without consequence. The Beck faction hit 2 of our Mapo collection points this week, he said, voice low. Combined loss of 40 million. Beck Sungchul is pushing west. Ji-ho turned his coffee cup once, clockwise, then back. Find out where Sungchul services his car, Ji-ho said. Then by the shop. Min-jun stared at him. By the... He'll understand the message, Ji-ho said. And it won't require anyone to be loud about it. Min-jun nodded and stood to leave. That was the thing about Ji-ho. He never wanted loud. He had built 15 years of power on the principle that the quietest move was always the most devastating one. Min-jun was almost at the door when it happened. It was 8:47. Ha-Eun would remember the time precisely because she had just glanced at the clock behind the counter and thought, 40 more minutes until close. The door swung open hard. 3 men. Fast. Deliberate. Wrong. The first locked the door behind him. The second swept Desol's clipboard off the counter with one arm. The third, the leader, the one whose hands hadn't stopped moving since he walked in, raised the gun and fired into the ceiling. The sound was enormous. Then the screaming. The couple by the window dropped. The 2 young women at the center table grabbed each other. The businessman in the back knocked over his chair. Desol made a sound like every bit of air had left her at once and pressed herself flat against the wall. Everyone down, the leader shouted. His voice cracked on the last word. On the floor. Hands where I can see them. Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt. Down. Ha-Eun had set the plates down before the echo of the gunshot faded. She lowered herself to the floor. Slowly. Deliberately. Not the collapse of panic, but the measured descent of a woman making a choice. Her face was pale. Her hands were flat against the cold tile. They were not shaking. Not yet. Later, she would think about that. The way the body sometimes rises to meet a moment. The way fear can be folded and set aside when there is no room for it. She had learned that at 17, when her parents died, and there was simply no one else to hold things together. You either learned to carry it, or everything fell. In the corner booth, Ji-ho had ended his call the moment he heard the door lock. He was already reading the room. 3 men. 1 visible weapon. Likely the only one, given the way the other 2 were positioned. Amateurs. The leader was spiraling. His crew was barely holding formation. There were 5 civilian targets. 2 staff. He could end this. He had ended harder things than this before breakfast. But he stayed still, because the woman on the floor was doing something that made him pause in a way that almost nothing made him pause anymore. She was watching the leader, not with fear, with the focused, measuring attention of someone running a calculation. The leader, his name was Sung-jae, though none of them knew that yet, was deteriorating fast. He moved through the restaurant in short, jerky bursts. demanding the manager, demanding the safe, screaming at people to stop looking at him, then screaming at them to look at him. He had no plan beyond this moment. Ji-ho could see it. Whatever had seemed manageable in his head was fracturing against the reality of 8 terrified people and a gun that had already fired once. The soul was hyperventilating behind the counter, small, desperate sounds escaping her with every breath. And in his corner, Mr. Yoon, the elderly man Ha-Eun had given extra rice to just 2 hours ago, was clutching the front of his jacket. His face had gone the color of old paper. His lips were pressed tight. Ha-Eun saw it. She had studied enough to know what that color meant. She looked at Sung-jae. She measured him the way she had measured every difficult thing in her life. Not the size of it, but the shape of it. The specific geometry of this particular danger. And then she spoke. Hey. One word. Quiet. Not a challenge. A human sound dropped into an inhuman room. Sung-jae spun. The gun came up. Shut your. That man is going to have a cardiac event, Ha-Eun said. Her voice did not shake. Look at his color. Look at his hands. If he collapses, someone calls an ambulance before you can stop them, and this becomes something you cannot walk away from. The room held its breath. I'm not arguing with you, she continued, before he could interrupt. I'm not being brave. I'm giving you practical information. Let me bring him water. That's all. Then I sit back down, and I don't say another word. Sung-jae stared at her. The ugly, brittle energy in him met her steadiness and didn't know where to go. He was used to fear. He was used to begging. He was not used to a woman on the floor looking up at him like she was simply waiting for him to make the logical choice. Fast, he said. His arm lowered an inch. Ha-Eun rose from the floor. She walked to the counter, filled a glass, walked to Mr. Yoon, crouched beside him, and pressed the glass into his hands. Small sips, she said quietly. Breathe through your nose. Look at me. He looked at her. His eyes were wide and frightened and old. You're okay, she told him, steady as the floor beneath them. This is going to be okay. She squeezed his hand once, stood up, walked back to her spot, sat down, exactly as she'd promised. In the corner booth, Park Ji-ho had not moved, but something had shifted in him. Somewhere behind his eyes, in the place where he kept the things he didn't examine too closely, a door had opened, just slightly, that he had kept sealed for a very long time. He had seen brave people before. He had seen people act under pressure. He knew what courage looked like when it was performed, and he knew what it looked like when it was real. This was real, and the part that was doing something strange to his chest, the part he could not categorize and file away, was that she had been afraid. He could see it, if you knew exactly what to look for. The deliberate slowness of her breathing, the rigid control of her shoulders. She was terrified, and she had spoken anyway, not because the fear wasn't there, but because she had looked at it directly and decided it would have to wait. Ji-ho had met men who claimed to be fearless. He had never believed any of them. This was the first time he had seen what fearless actually looked like. It looked like a woman in a cafe apron, sitting back down on a cold tile floor, having done exactly what she said she would do and nothing more. Then everything broke. The youngest of Sung-jae's men, the one whose hands had not stopped shaking since they walked in, made a mistake. He reached out and grabbed Sol by the arm. She screamed, full and piercing. The sound broke something in the room that had been barely holding together. Mr. Yoon made a sound. The couple scrambled. Sung-jae spun, losing track of the room. And in losing track of the room, he lost track of his plan. And in losing track of his plan, he became exactly the kind of desperate, cornered man that people got hurt around. Ji-ho stood up. If this story has you gripped, drop a comment right now telling me, what would you have done in Ha-Eun's position? And make sure you've liked the video. He didn't move fast. He didn't need to. He straightened his jacket with one hand. That was all. And then he spoke. Put her down. 2 words. The temperature dropped. Sung-jae wheeled toward him. The gun came up fast. Who are you? Get on the floor, get down right. Look at my face, Ji-ho said. His voice had not changed. Same volume. Same pace. Like the gun pointed at him was a minor inconvenience he hadn't decided how to feel about yet. Look carefully, and think about whether you recognize it. Sung-jae looked. 5 seconds passed. The blood left his face. Not slowly. All at once. Like someone had pulled a plug. Sung-jae started. His voice had changed entirely. The aggression, the desperation, gone. What was left was something much more naked. We didn't know you were here. I swear, we would never have. The girl, Ji-ho said, glancing at Desol. Release her. The younger man let go of Desol's arms so fast he stumbled backward. Desol dropped behind the counter, shaking violently. Ji-ho looked at Sung-jae for a long moment. The kind of look that said everything and needed nothing added to it. You will leave now, he said. All three of you. Tomorrow morning, you will present yourself to Min-jun Choi and give a full accounting of this evening. A pause so small it barely existed. And you will hope, sincerely, that I remain in the mood I am currently in. The three men were gone in under 60 seconds. The locked door was somehow no longer locked. The restaurant exhaled. Desol sobbed behind the counter. The good kind, the released kind. Someone was already on their phone. The couple near the window held each other without speaking. The businessman sat very still with his hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. Ji-ho was already moving toward the exit. This was the discipline of his life. Walk in. Handle it. Walk out. No trace. No scene. No unnecessary presence. He had lived by that principle for 15 years, and it had never failed him. He passed Ha-Eun on his way to the door. She was kneeling beside Mr. Yoon. 2 fingers pressed gently to the old man's wrist. Counting. Her nursing training surfacing through everything else, even now, even here. She looked up as Ji-ho passed. Thank you, she said. No performance. No relief pouring out. Just 2 words, said simply, because they were true. Ji-ho stopped. It was involuntary. He was aware of that immediately, because very few things in his life were involuntary anymore. He had spent years burning that out of himself. He looked at her. Up close, he could finally see what he'd suspected from across the room. Her hands were trembling. Not dramatically. Not visibly to someone who wasn't looking. But he was always looking. The calm had been a choice. Every word, every steady movement. She had chosen it against her own body's fear, moment by moment, the entire time. Something moved through him that he couldn't name, which was its own kind of alarming. He had a name for everything. He looked at her for one long second. Then he walked out into the Seoul night without a word. Ha-Eun watched the door close. Then she turned back to Mr. Yoon and kept counting. Later that night, in a penthouse on the 42nd floor of a building in Gangnam, he owned through 6 layers of shell companies. Park Ji-ho stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. Min-jun arrived at 11 and briefed him. Sung-jae, low-level Beck faction runner. Bad debt. Desperate. The robbery had been his own idea, unsanctioned, reckless. It would be handled. Ji-ho listened, nodded, and then said something that made Min-jun go very still. The waitress. The one on the floor who spoke to them. Find out who she is. Min-jun looked at him. The waitress. Her name. Where she lives. Her background. Everything. A pause. Just information. Just information. Min-jun had worked for Ji-ho for 15 years. He had never once heard him ask about a civilian. Not after a deal, not after a crisis, not after anything. He kept his face perfectly neutral. I'll have it by morning. Ji-ho turned back to the window. He told himself it was professional. That someone with that kind of composure was worth understanding. An asset to be cataloged. A variable to account for. He was very good at telling himself things. He'd had a long time to practice. Across the city, in a small apartment where she could touch 2 walls at once if she stretched, Ha-Eun sat on the floor with her back against the couch and let herself shake. It came in waves. The fear she'd locked away all evening arriving now that there was finally space for it. Her breath went uneven. Her hands, so steady for so long, trembled against her knees. She pressed her palms flat against the floor. A technique she'd taught herself at 17. The weeks after the fire. The panic attacks that had come so often she'd thought they were permanent. Feel the floor. You're still here. Everything else can wait. After a while, the shaking slowed. She thought about the man in the dark coat. The way the room had changed when he stood up. The way Sung-jae's face had drained. The way Ji-ho himself had seemed untouched by all of it. Not cruel, not cold, just operating at a temperature that other people couldn't reach. And the way he had stopped. When she said thank you, she didn't know what to do with that. So she put it away, the way she put most things. Carefully. For later. She picked up her nursing flashcards. Studied until she fell asleep. The next morning, Cafe Myri wore the evidence of the night before. A hole in the ceiling. Mr. O on the phone with a contractor. The police had come and gone with unusual efficiency, the kind that didn't come from good police work. On the counter, in a plain envelope with no name, was enough cash to cover the repair the police filing fee, and 3 months of Desol's wages. Mr. O had no idea where it came from. Ha-Eun stood and looked at the envelope for a long time. She had no evidence, no name, no note, but she knew. The way you know certain things before the logic catches up, in the chest, in the quiet, in the specific weight of an act that was careful and anonymous and asked nothing in return. She put her apron on, began to set up for the day, and at the kitchen door, she stopped and looked back at the corner booth. Empty. Just a table. A chair. The ghost of a coffee cup. Black. No sugar. Something moved through her chest she didn't have a name for yet. That evening, Min-Jun set a thin folder on Ji-ho's desk at 7 in the morning and summarized it in one sentence. She's nobody, boss. Completely clean. Ji-ho opened the folder. Ha-Eun, 29. Parents gone. House fire, 12 years ago. One younger brother. 4 years of nursing school on top of full-time work. No debt beyond rent. No affiliations. He looked at the photo. A staff ID. She wasn't quite looking at the camera, a slight angle to the side, like someone who had never expected to be the subject of anyone's attention. Nobody. Ji-ho closed the folder. Nobody, he said quietly. And something in his voice, something so small that Min-Jun almost missed it, suggested he found that word almost funny. That evening, Ha-Eun was mid-shift when the door opened. She glanced up. Automatic. The reflex of any cafe worker logging arrivals without thought. She stopped. Dark coat. Corner booth. And this time, this was the difference. He was already looking at her before he sat down. Not the peripheral noticing of the night before. Not observation. A choice. He held her gaze for one full second and then sat down. Ha-Eun finished her table, set her tray down, picked up her notepad, walked over. Same as before. Same as before. She wrote it down. Turned to go. Your hands aren't shaking today. Ha-Eun stopped walking. She didn't turn around immediately. She took the time she needed. 1 breath. 2. And then she turned. Her face was calm. Steady. A match, almost for his. They weren't shaking yesterday either, she said. Something shifted across his face. Controlled. Restrained. But there. Ha-Eun walked back toward the kitchen. And in the corner booth, Park Ji-ho watched her go. For the first time in 5 years, longer than that, maybe, he smiled. Not the performance of a smile. Not the diplomatic expression he deployed in meetings and negotiations and rooms where everything was a move in a game. A real one. Small. Quiet. Almost nothing. But real. And Park Ji-ho, who had spent 15 years making sure nothing was real anymore. Nothing that could be used against him. Nothing that could find the gap in the wall. Sat with that smile and did not immediately try to take it back. Which was, in the language of men like him, the most dangerous thing he had done all week. If this story got you, and I think it did, subscribe right now and hit the bell so you don't miss episode 2. Comment below, did Ha-Eun already know who he was? Because I'm starting to think she did. Like the video if you want more. See you next week for episode 2 of Calm Like a Storm.